All right, welcome to Quixotic Heights, the podcast where we explore extraordinary stories, unexpected journeys, and the heights of human imagination. I'm your host, Amy M. Lee. Today, we're joined by Jackie Kraft. She's a writer, journalist, educator, storyteller whose life and work defy some simple categories. Jackie is the author of Some of My Best Friends Are ETs and also Under a Sunflower Moon. And Some of My Best Friends Are ETs is actually a memoir that chronicles her lifelong encounters with extraterrestrials, whereas Under a Sunflower Moon is a collection of Cherokee stories and poems that honor heritage, resilience, and the sacred in everyday life. So, from producing documentaries and radio for Kansas City stations to teaching children with special needs, to serving her community through countless boards and organizations. Jackie's voice carries both authority and heart. In her writing, she invites us to look beyond the ordinary, whether it's through the lens of interstellar contact or the survival stories of her Cherokee ancestors. Today, we'll talk about what it means to live with mystery, to honor ancestral wisdom, and to find courage in telling stories that many might not dare to share. So Jackie is here to take us on a journey that spans galaxies and generations. So with that, welcome, Jackie. How are you? And thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here and tell you a little bit about both of my books.
I'm excited too. Let's first start with what your Quixotic Heights dream is. I always like to ask my guests that question.
Well, I love the book about Don Quixote and how he would tilt with windmills and chase his dreams. I do think I have had dreams of special goals all my life. And in reflecting on your question, I'm not sure what my dreams are anymore. I'm 82 years old, so I've been able to live out some of my dreams. But I think my dream as an elder person is to write for myself, write stories that I've wanted to write all my life, report on unusual things that have happened or that I've heard told, maybe around a campfire or by my grandmothers. My first book actually is connected to my father's mother, and my second book is connected to my mother's mother. And I didn't think about how deep the connection was to my dreams until you asked me to be on your podcast. And I was trying to reflect today, what dreams do I have left? Well, I have several more books that I want to write, about 10. And my dream is most of my family lives well past 100. One of my dreams is to live that long. And hopefully, the brain will stay healthy enough and the body that I can sit down and write what I want to write and have them published and maybe talk to people about it, what I've written.
I think that's beautiful, and that's a wonderful dream to have. Congratulations for, 8 decades of living, and I have no doubt you're gonna keep going strong, especially with that heritage. But let's talk about Under a Sunflower Moon, Cherokee stories and poems. You said that was a nod to your father's father, right?
My
Um,
father's mother, yes,
oh, your father's mother.
yes, she walked out as a pioneer woman from a place they were living when she was about 13 years old, and her own mother died when she was about 15. And so her own mother was of the Cherokee Deer Clan, and the ancestors had walked the Trail of Tears back about 1838 and brought the covered wagon, and some of them died on the trail coming out here. There were actually 6 trails that people followed, and they liked to leave like in October or November when the ground became firmer with the cold. So because they were heavily loaded wagons, and the wagons didn't sink in the mud, or it was better to go during frozen, like December snow times. But anyway, she didn't know much about the Cherokee because they actually had stopped at the state line in Arkansas and didn't come on over into Tahlequah and the Cherokee land that was given in Oklahoma, the territory that was given to them. And so she didn't know a lot, but it started one day. I was about 7 years, 6 or 7. I was staying with my grandmother that summer, and we were having breakfast in her garden. And her friend, who was 90 years old, a Cherokee woman, had walked down the hill and said, "Can I give your granddaughter a gift. And my grandmother said, well, sure. And so it was a little box, and in it were three necklaces made out of corn. And that's how I really began this Trail of Tears of survival and hope, with these corn necklaces. And I wore them for years. And my grandmother said, well, my mom was of the Deer Clan, and I don't know much because she died when I was so young, and I raised my younger brothers and sisters, plus had 9 children. And now here's one of the granddaughters. She had 19 grandchildren. And she said, if I bring my daughter up to you, could you teach her something about the Deer Clan and the Cherokee ways? And so Mrs. Tifley, this older lady, said, sure. So the next morning was my birthday, and my grandmother tied a little cloak of white feathers around me and took me by the hand before the sun came up. We walked up the hill, and she had this beautiful garden in the backyard. We knocked on the screen door, and she came out and she said, I'm so glad to see you. Let's go to my little mound, which was in the center of her garden, and greet the sun. That morning greeting was very important to the Cherokee. They always faced the morning sun and watched it came up and asked for the blessings of the day. And they noticed what creatures would come to join them. Like that particular day, there was a red hawk circling in the sky, and that's an extremely good omen to people of the Cherokee tribe. And then not far, a deer came up, and that is our clan. So both my grandmother and Mrs. Tifley decided that this was a good omen. And we had our breakfast there in the garden. She had set it, and she began to teach me about the three sisters that were important to the Cherokee tribe. And the three sisters are the corn plant, the bean plant, and the squash plant. And it's very interesting how they came to that. It's connected to their creation story. But anyway, the bean plant grows straight up, and I mean, the corn plant grows straight up, and the bean plant wraps around, and the squash fans out. Well, those were in her garden, and her garden was bordered by sunchokes, and those are the roots of the sunflower. And one of the things that she liked to do is they name each month for something, like the strawberry moon because strawberries are there, or the cold moon. So I decided we like to dance when the sunflowers come out. We call it a stomp. Some people, if it's bigger, a powwow. But she had sunflowers around her garden, so I named this under a sunflower moon because we started in about, sunflowers come on around the 16th of August and go through in here in Oklahoma through Thanksgiving. And that's a time that I remember her teaching me, sometimes at night, sometimes during the day. So that's how that story begins. And in it, I go way back to the 1830s. Mrs. Tifley's grandmother was called Grandmother Trueshot. And the Cherokee at the time, she lived in northern Georgia. Oh, golly, I don't know how old a woman she was. I would guess she was around 60 in 1837. They lived just south of the Tennessee River, about where Dalton, Georgia is. And when Andrew Jackson and the Congress decided they wanted to remove all the Cherokee from their native land, gold had been discovered in northern Georgia, and a lot of people that were part of the 13 original states wanted to come into Georgia and have that land and move the Indians west of the Mississippi. But anyway, they went north finally when I think it was in late October or December, they loaded all the wagons and went north to a ferry crossing over the Tennessee River. There weren't bridges. And the ferry was operated by the chief of the Cherokee. His name was John Ross. He'd already moved on out to Oklahoma Territory in 1837, and was at a place called something like an Overland Park place. And then later they set up Tahlequah, which is a Cherokee word that means when two groups come together. And that actually became the capital of the Indian Cherokee Territory. But they crossed there at that river ferry. And then later, about that time, the town of Chattanooga grew up around this ferry. And of course, there's bridges now over the river. But they went kind of the southern route across Tennessee. That was their regular Indian land from generations before, and crossed at about where Memphis is, and then followed the trail kind of up through Little Rock and over to Fort Smith in Arkansas, and then came in to the territory. And her daughter, who was called the Cherokee name of many stars, died on the trail.
Mm.
And Mrs. Tifley's, I think that was her mother, and or her that Mrs. Many Stars was her mother, and Mrs. Tifley's own mother was a girl who carried the medicine bundle and had her little brother, and they buried their mother along the trail, and there were no real ways to mark the grave, so they would bury a corn bean, a squash bean, and uh, the three sisters that I said before, so that if they ever came back, those three things might be sprouting, and they could kind of hunt for that and the river, and that they followed along the Tennessee River, and in order to find the grave again if they wanted to. So there was a lot of death. I think about 13,000 people over the period of 3 or 4 years that took the Trail of Tears died, but a lot survived through just strong will, I think, and encouragement from each other, and a hope that they would be able to find a way to live in Oklahoma Territory.
Yeah, and what a responsibility that you had. Or maybe did you feel like you had such a responsibility to retell these stories and share these poems?
I do. There's an author, a poet here in Oklahoma. She's a wonderful poet. I think her name is Joy Harjo. But she speaks more of modern times on the reservation, and there's a lot of trouble on the reservation. By that I mean there's a lot of drugs and alcohol and divorce and wives that are hurt or abused. Lots of, I shouldn't say lots of crime, but sadness.
Mhm.
And that's more modern times. In the old days, the older women would sing the rattlesnakes to sleep in October or November, so that the warriors could go out in the Deer Clan tribe and hunt deer. And they had to sleep on the ground, as they were going along to hunt the deer up in the Appalachian Mountains or wherever the deer were they thought had spied were congregating. And there's a lot of bugs that bite if you sleep on the ground. So they would spread a big tobacco leaf out. But they also didn't want to get bitten by snakes. So they'd wait till the snakes would kind of go under a rock. And the songs that they would sing, the old ladies on their front porch, they would sing the snakes to sleep. And I have one chapter about that. And I thought, I think the old ways, some of them are being forgotten. This is one of the uh, pictures that I drew in from the public domain. I thought it was so beautiful. It's a gold. It represents the gold that's found in Georgia, and why they had to move west of the Mississippi because of the greedy people who wanted to come in and just take their property. But also that they were mindful of snakes. They didn't want to just kill them. They just wanted to gently sing them under a dark rock so they'd stay put, and the warriors could go out and slay the deer. And then after that, after they would slay the deer, they had a special way of calling up the eagle finders. And those people would meet them, and they'd lay out the deer a certain way and stake it with certain pieces of wood. And the eagles hunt in pairs, and they would bring the eagles down, or they would begin to smell it. And when they were down feeding on that deer, then 4 or 5 warriors who had gone without food, probably, or sleeping on the tobacco leaves, they would shoot the eagles. And then the eagles in the ceremony, and they would always pray to them for forgiveness for killing them. But they needed the eagle's feathers for ceremonial purposes. So before they even went out on the hunt, they'd build a special little hut where they could clean the feathers and dry them and smoke them. And then also they would take the deer hide and clean it and smoke it in a certain way. And they used every part of everything that if they didn't use it for food, they used it for some kind of ceremony. But anyway, together with their cousins, the eagle finders and the eagle cleaners and so on, they would have enough feathers then to give to the shamans and the medicine people. And then usually they'd have a special eagle dance to celebrate a powwow. They did a lot of things in silence and sign language because they didn't want the eagles to hear that they were going to kill them and take their feathers, or that the deer was going to be the sacrifice that attracted the eagles. So I thought these stories were kind of slipping away, and that maybe young Native children would enjoy hearing what ancestors did to kind of preserve life and help keep the clans and the tribes going. By the way, there were once 14 clans, and they've kind of been absorbed. So now there are 7 clans, and each clan has now in Oklahoma a special flag that represents them when they go to a council meeting, and a special tree or wood. Ours is the white oak, and several special animals. Ours is the deer clan, but I can tell you some of the 7 tribes if you would like to know. Is there anything you'd like to know about the Cherokee? Well, before
I mean, all of this is amazing that you're preserving this, and especially, including these clan histories, right, for the modern readers. And I mean, what do you hope that the modern readers will learn from these clan identities?
I think that usually in the movies, the Native American, we call ourselves Indians, are the bad guys. The Lone Ranger would, and sometimes Tonto would represent the good qualities, the insightful qualities. But I think in a lot of cowboy and western movies, they got a bad reputation for always being on the warpath or slaying the pioneers as they were coming across the plains. What I would like them to know is that the Native Americans have a great reverence for all life and all things like rocks and rivers and trees, and well, trees are living things. Just a reverence, and that they believe that there's a spark of the creator in each thing, including like a rock or, I don't know, a turtle or whatever. And that they really have a spiritual reverence for almost everything, and they're peaceful mostly. I mean, they have reasons to go to war, but so anyway, some of the clans are the Wolf Clan, and their color is red, and they use the hickory tree for their special wood. They absorb the panther clan. There's the wild potato clan. It's green color. Their color is green, the color of new tobacco plants, and they use the birch tree when they come to kindle the sacred fire. Every tribe, when they come to the council, will bring maybe a log, and they'll put the 7 different kinds of woods together. There's the paint clan, and they're kind of a secretive people, but they're the corn people, and they have the locust tree. There's the Bluestone clan. And in this, I use the Cherokee words for each of the clans. And in the back of the book, I have a small index. I don't speak Cherokee. I can understand some words from way back. But as I said, I think I told you I'm 82 years old now. And this is a memory of when I was 7, 8, 9, learning a lot. There's the long hair clan, and they would walk with a twist. I don't know why. I used to know, I think. And sometimes they're called the strangers. And I don't know. I remember a story about it, but I can't seem to bring it up to my brain. Their favorite color to represent them is yellow with white feather robes. And I don't know if I might, in some of my ancestry way back, that white feather cloak that she tied on me might have come through that tribe to my grandmother's mother, and then she tied it on me. And their sacred tree is the birch tree. The small bird clan, purple color, they use blowguns, and it's very interesting. Certain tribes of Amazon natives had blowguns, and they don't know how the blowgun got all the way up from South America into where the Cherokee originally lived, and for them to use it, but they did. They were the maple tree. And last of all, Aniahawi, the clan of the shy deer. That's my tribe. Their color is soft brown like the earth we roam, and we're messengers, which is where I get the idea that I should bring the message of these stories and the truth of the survival and how hard it was to give up a loved one and bury them on the trail. And I wrote one poem about the trail of frozen tears, because really they cried and it froze on their faces, those that survived. Anyway, we brought the seeds and wood of the white oak tree to Oklahoma, and to help kindle the sacred fire and give
Mm.
thanks for our lives. And then we had to learn how to survive out here. Our clan was the deer clan, but we couldn't always find deer, so we hunted buffalo. And um, leaders in the tribe will have a medicine bundle, and you put things into it that are given to you, like if you find a piece of amethyst or rose quartz, save the ears of the buffalo, but you also pray for forgiveness and apology to the buffalo, but you need it to survive, and it becomes incorporated in your soul and in your body, and so you are one with the deer or one with the buffalo that you've killed and
Mm.
and eaten. And so I
Wow.
just wanted to preserve those things because in this modern world where we have iPhones and technology and fast whizzing pickup trucks and movies and TV and so on, podcasts, I
Yeah.
think it's interesting to go back and recall how people had to do everything and make everything. And you lived and died by what you could catch in the river or grow in your garden or hunt on the land.
Yeah. What a treasure, though, to be able to retell and share some of those stories. Would you be able to read something from your book, either a poem or a story?
I would. I would. Let's see. I was thinking, I don't know whether to read something sad. How to Bury a Star Woman is kind of sad. I might read instead, let's see, maybe I've got, I think I might do The Blue Corn Harvest. It's a little more positive and not so sad about somebody
Okay.
dying. So this was one that I wrote more about new times living in Oklahoma, and I called it The Blue Corn Harvest. I'm a child of the blue corn harvest. I gather my magic under a sunflower moon. In my medicine bag are 7 blue kernels of corn. Treasures saved last summer from a dying plant. Sweet, brittle mother, she whispered on the wind her truth to my heart. I named all of her blue corn children. The first seed I named Big Hope. The next I called Pure Blue Joy. I named Long Sorrow, Reconciliation, No Waiting, and Endless Harvest. The last seed I named True Love of Life. Tonight I will plant them, all 7 seeds, in red mud by the riverbank in eastern Oklahoma, by the river of no return. And that's also where the sweet potatoes bloom under my very own Cherokee sunflower moon. I will water the blue corn seeds while I dance with my tears of good memories of you. As I dance, I'll sing the whole night long of a whispered truth Blue Corn Mother taught me. I will sing to all the stars and howl her wisdom to the morning sun. If long sorrow blooms first, I'll pick her blossoms and scatter them to the frosty north wind. If reconciliation grows, I'll grind some corn seeds to feed all my tribe. I'll save seed children of reconciliation to plant again under a sunflower moon. When big hope, pure blue joy, no waiting, an endless harvest, and true love of life sprout at last, my tribe will hold a stomp and share the harvest at the powwow. We will give thanks to that whispering blue corn mother for her blessings and for her endless truth of optimism. Then I will braid my hair with wild onions and paint my face with red mud and dance again with the fireflies under that sunflower moon. I'll lie down among the sweet potato vines and wait for you, my brave warrior, to find me in the magic shadows and call my blue corn medicine, oh, so good.
Oh.
That's one of my favorite poems. And by the way, blue corn is really what the Hopi Indians tribe out in Arizona. I think that, the corn, they live next to the Navajo. That was really the corn. It's little tiny corn cobs about this big were given. But there was a place where Hot Springs is in Arkansas that people who were wounded or in a battle and need to revive, they would go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, now what it is called now, for the healing waters. And certain streams bubble up out of the ground, and there's different medicinal healing chemicals natural in the water that would, and people, different tribes would come and everybody would lay down their weapons because everybody was welcome there, and they would connect with the spirit of creation and heal themselves, and they would exchange little treasures, and sometimes those would go in. So one of my ancestors somehow, way back, I'll say 200 or 300 years ago, went there to get healed, and he traded and brought home blue corn seeds from that trip there. And so we had it within our family for a long time. And you would make blue corn muffins and you'd plant it. I mean, you had red corn and yellow corn and all the other stuff too that different people would trade. But I always thought the blue corn was interesting. And so I wrote about it.
I love it. I love it. Is there anything else you would like to share about this particular book before we pivot to your other one?
Well, but I might show you another picture. This is a picture of a beautiful spider web, and spiders were sacred to because they were very creative and they didn't give up, and they were creating a masterpiece. So I wrote about the gift of the spider. If a spider comes into your life, you should feel blessed. Celebrate the spider and her gift of weaving with understanding eyes. Don't kill her, just escort her outside. And then it goes on and on about how she's sacred also to writers. I just tried to write about interesting, enjoyable things for that, but I'd love to go on to the other book. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And I've always believed that spiders are amazing. There's some belief that, it's our ancestors coming to visit. And so I agree, don't kill them, escort them outside, whatever, respect all living things. But yes, let's pivot to some of my best friends are ETs. And
Well, yes, thank you. Yeah, go
talk
ahead.
about it.
Well, I have to say that under the influence of the Cherokee thought and way of looking at life, anything that has come into my life, I've tried to be open-minded about it, see what intellectual gift it might bring to me of understanding about the human condition. And I would say I learned about the Cherokee. I wouldn't say late in life, but I was at least 7 when I finally began to do that. But going through my entire life has been a relationship with the ET. And on the back of the book, I had and I wanted to mention my artist in this. She was full blood Creek Indian. You found her for me, actually. And sadly, she died soon after my book was published. But she was the one who suggested we go ahead and put the sunflowers and then the little squib all around the book. So I carried that theme over because where I lived in Kansas, Kansas has as the state flower the sunflower. And we lived at the very, very edge of town, and there was a whole field of sunflowers and cattle behind our house. It was the city limit and big cottonwood trees. And I remember the UFOs landing in our side yard, our front yard, in the street, and in this field of sunflowers, and them coming through to come and visit me. So in the back of the book, I put the big starship. I had the artist put the starship up at the top and shining down on the sunflowers, and on the front, 3 of what I kind of remembered, 3 entities that I sort of come to know, and I don't want to really say trust. I did trust them, who were friendly to me and didn't. They scared me a little because they were so strange. But I put on the back, all my life I've had strange experiences. Sometimes these creatures scare me. Sometimes they entertain me, but most of the time they baffle me. And that's really true. I've tried to understand them all my life and figure out why they might come to visit Earth. By the way, I feel like maybe they came from another planet thousands and thousands of years ago, and maybe have bases on the other side of the moon. But I think they've really been here with us under the oceans, in lakes. I believe that, and this has taken a lifetime to try to figure out, if you look at an atom or study chemistry and you know molecules and atoms, the center has a nucleus with the proton, a positive electric magnetic charge, and then swirling around like the Earth goes around the sun are the negative energy magnetic electron of Neut- the neutron, the proton, and the electron out there. And I believe that if they go through a mountain or in their spaceship, or if they go through a solid wall in their body, or if they take me through, they are able electromagnetically to separate all those positive and negative charges, go through whatever the solid thing is, like a mountain, if they have a base inside a mountain, and then reassemble. I don't know how they do it. Their technology is millions of years ahead of ours, but I know that they can fly through mountains or go into a base in a mountain or underground. I hope someday that the United States government will release all their files and tell us what's up. And by the way, and I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, I noticed September 9th, the U.S. House of Representatives started more hearings and took testimony from Navy people who've witnessed all kinds of aerial phenomena. The new term is let's see, aerial, unidentified, anomalous, I can't say the word very well, phenomena. They have so many
UAS,
syllables
yeah,
that I get distracted and I forget about my focus, which is talking about UFOs and ETs. I think I've seen about 15 different kinds. It's hard for me. I tell about all the kinds I've seen,
yeah,
but two
yeah,
or three of them seem to start as little balls of light and morph into something else. So I counted them as two things. But
yeah.
so,
And
what are your
UAPs, I don't
questions?
know why it's a UAS because you said phenomenal, and I'm thinking Fs, but UAPs, right? The
UAPs.
unidentified aerial phenomenon. Yeah, so let's take a step back because, I don't know if our readers truly or our listeners truly understand this is from personal experience for you. You've had encounters since I want to say 8 years old,
No,
um,
since
since
birth, maybe
birth.
before. Oh, yes, I started this when we had. So here's the story of how I got this started. I started with one night when they came, and usually they always let me know ahead if they're coming. I was just a little girl, and I started with that because the point I wanted to make was they often assess my little brother and me for abilities. They were sort of like IQ tests, but they were really more tests of like ESP or ability of mind over matter. And I
Mhm.
thought that would be interesting for an audience. And then I also had, after they would leave, I'd have lots of ESP experiences. Those were kind of side effects. So, no, they came originally. I wasn't even really walking. It was World War II. We were living in near Carmen, Oklahoma. My grandmother had bought a Pepsi Cola bottling factory early, abandoned in her life, and turned it into a hotel and a dining room, all you could eat for $1 and stay the night. And the Santa Fe train came through the town, and people would come up. They'd take a lunch break from the train for an hour and come eat at her restaurant. That was 50 cents. Or they would stay in the town overnight and catch another train out of town going south, like to Fort Worth, or west going to San Bernardino in California, and through like the Painted Desert and I don't know, Santa Fe, New Mexico. New Mexico. But anyway, we would sit out in the backyard and look at the stars. And this was my mother's mother and my mother, because my dad was off in the South Pacific. He had graduated from Central State College in Oklahoma. He was the youngest of nine, very poor children, and his mother had raised her little brothers and sisters before him. So it was like the last of 15 kids, and you got all the hand-me-downs. It was the Depression. He was born in 1910, as was my mother. They had no hope of going to college, yet my mother put herself through Teachers College, Northwestern in Alva, Oklahoma, and became a teacher. Ended up in his town. He met her, decided he was in love and wanted to make something of himself. He was a mechanic working for 50 cents a day. He was about the only one who had a job in the Depression. Saved up his money, went over to Central State. It was $5 a semester, books, tuition fees, everything. Took a job mending the boilers in the old buildings at Central State, got himself through school, and he had the ability to read something once and he had it memorized, and he loved math. So he graduated. He was like way older than every kid that was coming that year. It was 1937. And so he was about 27. And so by 41, when he graduated, he was 31 years old. That December was the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and he didn't think he thought he was too old to go into service, but his older brother had served in World War I, so he kind of knew about war. the Navy came out to the college and recruited people from, they asked the president, who were your sharp math students? And my dad was an A student and he was teaching junior high. They recruited him. They wanted to teach him the Navajo code. And so they sent him out to San Diego and he learned the Navajo code because he could read fast and memorize. It still took 6 months because they also taught him the Morse code and some other. And he didn't want to be an officer. They offered him a lieutenant job. And he said, no, my older brother said, when you lead people over the hill, sometimes your troops will shoot you in the back because they don't want to follow. He said, just let me be plain. So he was a radioman, first class aboard the USS Cape Johnson. They sent him to the South Pacific. They took the Navajo, the native Navajo that already knew how to speak Navajo, and embedded them in the soldiers, and they would take them ashore and bring out the wounded. And they would do this several places. So those people that were embedded and in the middle of the battle would radio to my dad, and he would take their information as fast as he could. Nothing was written down. And he would send the information then where it needed to go. Say there was a swarm of Japanese suicide kamikaze pilots coming in to bomb where some fighting was going on, or bomb ships or whatever. They might use a phrase. It was never a one word for one word translation. And I can tell you how I came to know this because they really, former service people really didn't talk about World War II much after they came home. But anyway, he would take the messages as fast as he could and relay them to the people who could go in and support the troops on the ground. And then they were bringing out the wounded all the time and taking in fresh Navajo code talkers. He said, one time we were sitting out in the backyard and I was catching fireflies and I plunked down in one of the outdoor seats and he was talking with a friend who had survived a corregidor and had been tortured. His one arm was totally wounded, but they were talking about the war times and I remember Charlie Allerton was his name. He said to my dad, well, are you Navajo? And my dad said, no, we know we're Cherokee, but it's not like Greek to Hebrew, one word translates for one word. It's like a word like grasshoppers means like a whole swarm of certain kinds of airplanes coming in from a certain direction, flying in, and it's more of a phrase. And so there, and then I got up to go catch fireflies. I wish I'd stayed in my seat because I would have learned a little bit more about my dad. He was in the Navy for 26 months. When he came home, they didn't have the word PPST or shell shock, but probably that's what it was. He didn't go back to teaching mathematics. He planted a garden. He helped build our new house, and we moved into it at the edge of town. He'd saved up all his money during World War II, and my mother had saved her money living down in the little Oklahoma town in that old Pepsi-Cola bottling factory that had been turned into a home for us. And we lived in this town of Newton, which was a terminal for sorting the mail on the train. And my dad took that job, sorting mail, and that was about all he was up to. He was kept as a translator and Navajo code talker for 6 more years after the war ended. It ended in 45. So up through about 51, because our government didn't know if they were going to need to have a secret code that nobody could crack, and that he would need to be called back in to help support the code talkers. So that was kept a secret. In fact, I really didn't know until even after he was let go from that position. And I don't know how many people were like him. I do know that at the Navajo reservation, I have identified the actual code talkers, and I think maybe there's 1 or 2 still left living. I really don't know. I'm going to try to find out in my lifetime.
Yeah. I think that was common back then too, because you didn't want to tell all the secrets, right? The enemy could
Right.
listen in. And so there were a lot of code talkers, Navajo being one of them,
Yes,
Choctaw, a couple other
they were.
other
They were
tribes.
used. They
Yeah.
were used because it threw people off. They had to kindly go through the whole thing and try to
Yeah.
start from
And
scratch out, figure it out.
Right.
But anyway, so, and my dad could speak some Cherokee. So he wasn't attached to that group at all, though he was attached to this group. And I thought it was interesting. But anyway, so when we were living down in the little Oklahoma town called Carmen, Oklahoma, in the backyard, the first time I ever really recall, I wasn't walking, I hadn't talked yet, and we were out there. My grandmother kept a Jersey cow and a Guernsey. One gave a lot of milk, one gave rich milk, and she'd put them together and she'd make ice cream in the summertime. And we'd probably been eating some ice cream in the backyard and watching the night stars come out. And across the backyard, there was a field where they planted wheat. My grandmother and grandfather they rented it to, but this factory was right on Main Street. So our front door was right on Main Street and the highway that went through town. And then there was the empty field, and behind that, the park that my grandparents had donated land to make a park. Anyway, we saw this kind of bright saucer-like thing come down and just hover in the field. And then somehow these little balls of light came out, and they were kind of bouncing along until they came to our backyard and then became beings. And these were not the little, well, there were a few little gray beings, but they were the kind of, I'll call them the shining ones. I don't know why, but they were taller. And they kind of surrounded us. My mother took one hand and my grandmother took the other. And they both said to each other, I think they're here to see me. And anyway, my mother said, don't take any hairs. She really doesn't have many teeth. You can't take a tooth. Don't take any skin. Tell me what you want. And I remember her kind of bargaining with them. She had kind of a tricky relationship with all these different entities. And boy, she really had a strong will and was ready to protect me in case they wanted to take me on board the ship, I think is what it was. But that was kind of my first assessment. And really, they just came to meet and greet. And then, so I want to skip forward because there's a whole lot in my book about what happened between then and when I was about 8 years old, turning 9. We had moved into our house. My dad had helped build it that year. And it was, the ground had never been plowed. The front of our house bordered an old Chisholm Trail cattle trail it was the side trail where the cattle would sleep by the river. The main street goes through the town, and the town is Newton, Kansas. And it was a big settlement of Mennonites in the 1870s whose children and grandchildren grew up there, a very peaceful community. And we just happened to live there because my dad's train route that the post office rented the car on the Santa Fe train where they could sort the mail ran from Newton to Fort Worth and back again. And so I heard this message in my head. It's like they think telepathically in my head, we're coming and there's going to be a lot of us. And so I got up and looked at the clock. We had a big mantle clock on the front in our living room. And I noticed it was about 2 o'clock. And anyway, they came. And there was a big ship kind of up in the sky, and then these little pilot ships would bring the people down, and they kind of beamed them down. And about 10 at a time, these little short gray would come in. And the one that had been talking to in my head, I put him here. And at one time I had asked him, well, do you have a name? And he was about 3 feet high, and he was about the same height as me. I was in the third grade. It was the summer after third grade in June, and we'd moved in. And he didn't really talk out loud, but he kind of like Mert, And so finally I just called him Mert in my own brain. And I would sometimes talk out loud to him, or I would send my thoughts back to him. And I said, I don't want to be afraid. And he said, don't be afraid. We're just here to offer you some questions of that nature. And he said, and so finally, the one that was in charge was a little bit taller, and they came in my living room. My mother loved rag rugs and early American furniture, and she'd bought some new furniture for the house. So the rug was kind of oval shaped, and they kind of made a circle in the living room of about 30 of them. And the one in charge came to me, and he had this black box. And I show kind of a picture of the old matchbox, that you could pull the side out, and it's cardboard, and you reach in and get a match and strike it on the side. This didn't have a lid. It was all black. And he kind of held it, and there were two partitions and an orange ball about the size of a marble that kind of glowed and kind of suspended between the two partitions. And he said to me in my mind, telepathically, I want to show you that I can move it through this partition over to the side and then back to the middle, and then through this partition to the side and back to the middle. Can you do that? And he gave me the box to hold. And I looked at it and looked at it and looked at it and tried. And I finally got it to go through one of the sides and finally got it to come back to the middle. And it took me forever. I just didn't have the mental power to make that little orange ball move. And I said, could my mother come out? And they said, sure. And mother came out and she said, oh, and talked to them about why they were there and what they were doing. Well, they were looking for abilities and they wanted her to get my little brother up. Now, my brother's 5 years younger than I am, so he was 4. He had never been to kindergarten. He didn't know how to count. He didn't know the alphabet. And so my mother got him up and she said, I don't know that he can do this. Well, they gave the little box to him, and with his mind, he got that little orange ball spinning. It went through the partition back to the middle, the other partition side back to the middle, and he got it going faster and faster, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until it turned a bluish, silvery colored ball of light. And they were satisfied to see that. And many times they would come and give us other kinds of tests, like taking my dad's ashtray that was on his side table. I didn't write about this in the book, and moving it over to another table with just our mind. We had a dinner bell up on the mantle, and they wanted us one time to mentally pick it up and make it ring, or make the clock hands go around the clock and it would ding on the half hour and then it would count the time, the hour, as it came up to 12. I didn't write about all these things because they're so unbelievable, even still to me to this day. But many things like that, to see how strong we could do mind over matter. And those were just some of them. There were all kinds of puzzles and riddles and philosophical questions. So after that session was over, my mother carried him into the kitchen and they put something. He always loved to drink milk. I'm not a milk drinker. I can eat a little ice cream and I didn't care for milk. So I never drank the milk, but they put something in it that helped him totally forget. Now, they had had a relationship with my mother before I was born and my grandmother. She had been a pioneer woman, child in Iowa. And when she was about 5 or 6, her family moved from Iowa through Omaha across the Missouri River. They waited till it had frozen solid to cross. She was about 6 years old. On her birthday, they crossed. It was frozen solid. And then the next spring, they stayed in Omaha for the winter and they walked, followed the Republican River to Ness County, Kansas, and lived in a dugout. And all their cousins came in wagon trains, and some were called, oh, I could tell you all their names, but there's a picture of about 25 of them. Some of them are standing on the roof of the dugout. They all lived together and they had enough wood to make a door or a table. So it was spring, so they made a table and they put a curtain over the door. And then eventually they all built houses and lived out in Ness County. And then later she came down into Oklahoma when Western Oklahoma was opened for settlers to come in during territorial days. But anyway, they would land a lot in their fields, and she had quite a relation. My grandmother had quite a relationship with them, and my mother and grandmother would say sometimes they would take a piece of hair. My Aunt Vashti said they would take a tooth and sometimes hair and scrapings on my mother's skin, and even like scoop marks. And back then, and this was like about 1950 when I was 7, we didn't know about DNA or what you could tell about a person's health. You can actually, I tell from the hair what a person, I think, has been eating or in their lifetime had recently of food. With teeth, they can tell not only the DNA, but a lot about the health of a person. I personally think, and I write about this in the book, that they were looking for certain people, not only with mind over matter abilities, they were looking for a blood type. And my particular blood type is O negative, which is the universal donor. And I do believe they were looking for that. I don't know why. I don't know. But I do know now in recent readings I've read that sometimes O negative is helpful to people if they have, oh, say COVID, they don't get as bad a case, or TB or cancer or something. So there might be something within that blood that they're following or they're interested in. I don't know.
Hmm.
But anyway, I've seen about
That's so
15
negative.
different I've seen about 15 different kinds of characters. And of course, we never told anybody. We didn't even tell my father that these beings came. My father did mention one time that when he was on board, he always felt protected, because they were being blown out of the water with torpedoes all the time and attacked. But he always felt he was surrounded by like an angel presence that was guiding him and protecting him. And he talked about it once to me. We were out in his garden. I mentioned that a little bit, but it was a really, and I have felt that too. I have actually, what I think I've seen are angels in a protective mode. When my second husband died, I felt that I saw angels in the room surrounding, pardon me, I might cry, surrounding him. And I've always felt a spiritual presence because I grew up on the Cherokee stories anyway. But so I start with that in the book because I thought that was the most strange thing that happened. But there were stranger things. For example, let's see, my dad came home from the war in 45. I was 2.5. I was 3 the next May. We had gone up to get our house, and my folks had saved enough money. They had a down payment on the house. So we moved into that little house. It faced the east. I just drove by it a couple of months ago, and all the big cedar trees are gone. But I remember my dad said, well, there's going to be a big 4th of July celebration in Peabody, Kansas at the park. Would you like to go Sunday and check out the park and maybe go back for 4th of July? And my mother said, oh, let's call up our friends and we'll all bring potluck. And so we called up the Lehmans and the Kennedys and their kids. And we went there for just Sunday after church and had a picnic. And, everybody was dressed up in the men wore suits to Sunday school and ties. And my dad had a really nice Stetson hat that he wore, and he wore Florsham shoes. And my mother sewed everything. She had made me a beautiful little Sunday school dress with a twirly skirt, my little patent leather shoes. We played in the park and we had our picnic. We didn't wear play clothes. And the other ladies, every lady wore a hat to church, and their necklaces, like Leave It to Beaver, if you ever watched that old TV show,
Mhm.
or I Love Lucy. They were dressed up when they went somewhere. So we had that Sunday in the park, and we came home, and we had finally gotten our Chevrolet. We had to get on a list after the war, while all the factories changed over from making war planes and stuff, engines for the bombers, to making a refrigerator or a stove or a washing machine or a Chevrolet car. So my dad rented a garage about a week or a block up the street from a man named Tomlinson, and he'd drop us off by the front porch. We'd go in, unlock the door, turn on the lights. My dad would drive the car up, park it, and walk home. Well, that particular night, we got out and we were carrying the picnic stuff up the front steps. My baby brother hadn't been born yet because I was just about 4. It was 1947, about around the 1st of July, the end of June. And I said, Mom, look over there. And there were these little beings kind of standing there looking about eye level at the porch. And we had about 4 steps up, 5. We were on the porch. Their eyes were about level with that. And I said, I think they want to talk to us. And my mother finished unlocking the door. She didn't turn on the light. And she said out loud, who have you come for?
Mm.
And they thought in our head, they said, we want Jack, my daddy, in so many words, in our head. And she said, all right, but he's on his way home, and I'll take you to him. And she took me by the hand. She put all the picnic stuff down, took me by the hand, didn't turn on any lights. We went down the stairs. We marched up the sidewalk. And there was my dad. I mean, everything had disappeared. All the sounds of crickets, all the sounds of dogs, all the traffic sounds from the highway, and the trains came through Newton. We had like 26 train tracks. They were always blowing. And then we had another train, the Missouri Pacific, besides the Santa Fe, that came through. So there were loud noises, even through the night. And we'd sleep through it mostly, but they'd blow their horns, wake everybody up. But anyway, as we went up the street, we could see all the street lights were out, and anybody up, their lights were out. It was total silence. And there was my dad crossing 10th Street to come down High Street where we lived, kind of in mid-stride. And I can see him in my mind's eye. He had his hat on, his suit jacket wasn't buttoned across the way he would when he'd walk into church. He was just walking along, totally frozen in space and time. So my mother led them there, and here was this kind of sorcery, the little kind that I call them like the transport between the little and the big, come to get him. And my mother said, let's let my daughter go with him so he won't be frightened. And that's what they wanted. They wanted me to hold his hand. Well, they took us up. I don't know if my mother walked back home or what, because I didn't see her till like the next day. My dad and I were kind of like, it's really like a beam of light, like you see on Star, beam me up. They took us up, and the next thing I knew, we were somewhere in Mexico or on the border. It wasn't the big thing that everybody knows about. What's the name of that town where the Roswell?
Yeah,
It wasn't Roswell
yeah.
yet. But there were other crashes down there, and they had my dad on the table, and I think my nose came about up to the edge of the table because I was 4 years old. I held his hand. He was also O negative, I know that. But at the time, I didn't understand why they would want his blood. But they sort of put a thought in my head that he was a good, kind person, and that affects the kind of blood you have. So maybe it does, but they wanted the enzymes in the blood, apparently, maybe not the blood, but maybe something out of the blood to help revive certain injured ET.
Hmm.
And we went not once, but more than once down there. And but anyway, so that's another strange thing that I put in the book. And then the next morning, there were my Sunday clothes. I mean, I still had my Sunday clothes on, and my dad was getting ready to go to work. It was like a Monday morning. And nobody said anything about anything, but I knew something had happened because I was allowed to remember it by not being, you know, given anything to forget or being zapped with a forgetful zap. Um, and so I just played with my toys, and my mother got us all in the car and took my dad to work and came back, and we went on with life. Um, so that's what I mean by we never really talked about. We talked among ourselves. And as I grew older and everything was discouraged or discredited about, and made a joke of if you saw entities or UFOs or went up in the UFO. But I feel that I had quite a lifetime of experiences. And I didn't tell all, but I wanted to tell a few things in my book and the different kinds of things that I'd run across. For example, one time when I was way older and had a daughter, she had been born with an eye that the muscles had never quite grown. And the other eye could see, but it actually gave her a double image. And so she was scheduled to have eye surgery. And one night we heard this thump, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I said to my husband, I think some beings are here to look at Elizabeth's eye. She was about 6 years old. I'll go down and see. And we were upstairs, and my daughter's bedroom is downstairs, and I was expecting our second child, and we'd prepared the other bedroom down there to be the nursery. And I kind of got about halfway down the stairs, and I looked, and there was this being about 8 feet tall with kind of a squashed hat, black, all black. And you could see through it. I called him the shadow, the three of them, the shadow people. And he was standing at the bottom of the stairs, and he thought in my head, he said, we're just here to look at your daughter's eye, see what's wrong, see what's happening. And he said, we'll wake you up when we leave. And I could see the light on in my daughter's bedroom. And I went up and I said to my husband, let's go back to sleep. They're going to wake us up when they leave. And he said, oh, okay. I can't believe that we just accepted it as something of a fact. Okay, we'll go back to bed. Let them look at our daughter. They're shadow people, 8 feet tall. You can see through them. So anyway, they made a loud thump and we woke up. It sounded like our wooden garage door was slamming. I said, oh, let's go down. And we both went running down. My daughter's in the bathroom washing her eye, and she has this big brown, like iodine circle, and then another kind of reddish brown around it, as though it had been painted with some kind of mercurochrome to keep out germs or whatever. And she said, Mom, they took the eyeball clear out of my head and looked at it and put it back in, and I'm trying to wash this off. And I said, well, what did they look like to you? And she said, you could see right through them. They were black, they were dark, they were shadow-like. But they were nice and they were kind, and they said I'd get well. Well, she did get well. After the surgery, they were able to give her eyes that tracked binocularly. They were able to fix the two muscles in the paralyzed eye. And Anyway, finally, when she was about 20, she had a surgery that gave her 20/20 vision.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't scare me. I mean, it puzzled me. It puzzled me. So that was just one kind of entity I saw. I've seen some others that are so strange, and I list them in here. I call my mother and grandmother had sort of a relationship with what I call the white owl ladies. And sometimes I think they really appeared as angels, but mostly they appeared as snowy white owls, as tall as I am, just beautiful face, but all owl. And they could fly in and fly out. And I think it sort of masks who they really were. I don't know, but it sort of was what they called them, the white owl ladies. And I saw them in my Aunt Vashti's garden and or in my grandmother's garden. And they too would talk telepathically. Or they would leave things out for me to find, like a white feather or another white feather. And I would follow those feathers up to the woods, and there they would be sitting in the plum thicket, kind of like humming or murmuring to each other. And then we would have a telepathic conversation. So I
Yeah.
was only scared one time, and that they somehow fixed my memory that I can't remember all about. I'd probably benefit going to a hypnotist and letting him hypnotize me, maybe a psychiatrist, and finding out what memory I don't have. And I do write a little bit about that. We sometimes certain ones, it's not like they give you an order and you go do it, but certain beings will compel me. Like one time I was working at the TV station and I usually didn't take lunch out of the building, but I felt like I wanted to go from Fairway, where our TV station, the CBS affiliate was, down to the bookstore in Prairie Village. And I just left for the lunch hour to go down and get a little sandwich. And I pulled up to the bookstore, and there in the window was a pyramid stack with the cover showing of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion. It had just come out, and at 4 o'clock that day, back in my office, I had 3 TVs tuned to the radio or TV news so I could keep abreast of any breaking story. And Whitley was a guest on Oprah Winfrey talking about his brand new book, Communion, in which he talks about his visitations and his relationship with the ET. And I was glad to see it, but I kept feeling compelled to go, and I didn't know why they wanted me to go, but that was kind of where I listened to him, and I went there and I bought the book. And so my boss came in and he said, what are you looking at? What's on your desk? And I said, oh, it's the book that's on Oprah. Turn around and look. That's the man who wrote it. And we talked about Whitley Strieber and the UFOs for a little bit, and Oprah's interview. But
Wow.
it's been an
Yeah.
interesting relationship. But they don't
Yeah.
visit me anymore. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, actually, and it's funny because I can listen to you all day long, and you have so many stories, and you talk about the different, ETs in your book, which I encourage everybody to read. But we're coming up on our hour already, and before we close, one of the things that you and I talked about offline was your NDEs, your near-death experiences, your past lives. Could you just touch on that?
I can. I will tell you they are strange to me too, and I wish I knew more. But I can. My first memory, I was about 8 or 9 or 10 years old, and I remember being in this castle, and so I would pore over books at the library until I would see something that would kind of jog my memory, or I would go to antique stores and look at antiques in case something would jog my memory. But I remember standing at the wall and looking out at the mountains. My mother went on a trip to Italy, Siena, Italy, and I finally saw a building that looked like where I had been standing in this former lifetime. And I think I lived there. Sadly, I think I jumped over it and killed myself. I hope I didn't. But I also remember a lifetime when I was like a little old person walking along the lane, and I sat down under a tree, and I might have died. I remember little bits more. I lived like almost in a grass thatched hut in that lifetime. I can remember about 6 to 10. Sometimes they're just such fleeting memories. But one of the strangest ones, I remember being a rabbit, and it was torn up by 5 dogs. And I've always had this thing. So in one of the memories, the biggest memory I remember was when that I had died about the year 1940. And for a long time, as a little tiny kid, I could remember my first and last name. I thought it was Marilyn Forrester, and I would search the obituaries to see if I could find somebody who died in November. And then about 2 years later, 3 years later, I came into this body as a soul and grew up as I've grown up. And that particular person did a life review. I remember I was in surgery at a clinic, and I floated out of my body, and the anesthesiast said, "She's dying. I think we've lost her. We have lost her." And I floated out. I looked back at the surgeons and the anesthetist, floated through the brick wall across the park and the school and all the way to my backyard where I was living in Newton in this memory. And I must have lived in that neighborhood or maybe even that house as a young woman as a secretary. I was about 27 years old during this when I died in that lifetime. And here was this being off the ground about 2 feet, totally in white, with his hair parted and blonde hair. And I felt he was an angel that was reviewing my life, and he showed me my life one day at a time, like a flip screen. And we'd walk into it 3D, and he'd say, "Oh, you had pets, but I see you didn't fill their water dish, or you didn't give them food." And he said, "You're going to be given one last time to be a human being. And this time you must be kind to all people and all pets. And remember to put them first and feed them first and be kind to them and take good care of them." That was one of the admonitions he gave me in my review. And then it was like the sky opened up, and it was like a jungle gym not made out of those aluminum bars that you climbed on as a little kid, but beams of light like pink and turquoise and lime green and purple. And they were just beams of electric light. And if you could float in between them, you wouldn't get your memory zapped. And I remember floating, floating, floating. And when I woke up the next day, I was about in first grade, and I remembered that memory of the past life and the life review and all the things he told me for a long time. And I was obsessed with searching for this person. And I even know where she worked, and where she parked her, or where they picked her up. Her mother picked her up in the car, or her father picked her up, or she sometimes drove the car to work. And I remember who the doctor was. But I believe that there's so many things in our world that we don't have answers for. I'm still curious about everything, even as old as I am. And I guess I would add that to the dreams. I would really like to know more. My dream is that all things will be revealed and we'll understand. And I just want to say, cautionary, this one lady in the middle was the one that would do medical exams and come and test my blood and my hair and teeth and so on from time to time after sometimes I had been through a situation. And I called her Queenie because she was about a head taller than all the other little things. This one was about 2 feet tall, and he was a buddy of Mert. And I called him Sandy because in the Sunday papers there was a cartoon called Little Orphan Annie, and she had a dog with these eyes. And he would just trail along Sandy, and that's what he made me think of, is that cartoon in the comics on Sunday to Mert. I felt that I was never in danger or peril except that one time that I really can't remember too much about. And there is one type of entity that some UFO writers, reporters say are a reptilian. Now, I don't ever remember seeing reptilian type ETs, but I do know these, when they came, a car pulled to a stop, it quit, it was on. I was driving down the country road, and it was nighttime. And I remember that the arm was dark and it had big claws on it. And I remember they took my mother to one UFO and me to another one. And then later we had lost about an hour of time and we arrived home. And I said, well, try to remember what you can remember. And then tomorrow we'll talk some more about it. But anyway, my mother remembered a past life, and it was in Spain, which she's part Swiss and part English and some other things, French. But I think it was in France during the Napoleonic times, and she kind of remembers the soldiers marching by. on their way to go fight somewhere. And so we had talked in our family openly of past lives, and I guess that's why I keep an open mind on what could possibly be. I just wish somebody would answer it and prove it scientifically. I really am rooted in fact. I try to stand on the facts that I remember, and I think the facts can stand for themselves. And I'm hopeful NASA has assembled a committee of about 16 people to do the scientific research and to try to figure out what this phenomena is. And I hope that there's another group at some hospital trying to figure out what, if people really can, what the soul does. Does it lift out of the body and reincarnate, or does it go off to heaven, or does it just dissipate? I think there's a scientific answer for everything eventually.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. That's a lot to digest here, Jackie. And I, like I said, I can talk to you for hours, and we
Thank
have
you.
talked for hours,
Okay.
actually.
Well, one to
Um,
that.
yeah. So before we close, are there any other topics that you want to cover? I mean, you've done a lot in your lifetimes already with, working at the stations and producing shows. Do you want to give any insight into that?
Well, I just loved it. I couldn't wait to get to work. I didn't want it to end. I actually had found a job that paid less than school teaching. I think I worked my way up as a producer to $8 an hour. This was way back in the 18 or 1980s. So I went back to school teaching special ed, and I did that a total of about 25, 30 years off and on from 65 till I retired in '02. And then I worked as a substitute teacher, and it was a wonderful classroom. I just decided I'd retire. But what I wanted to say is both my books are on Amazon.com and Ingram Spark. You are the publisher of Quillhawk Publishing, and you took me on as a possible author and encouraged me. You were president of our writing club here in town in Oklahoma City, and I'm grateful to you for that. I'm working on new books. My new series is, I'm hoping to get five, maybe 20. It's a mystery series. The professor is not a, she's not a sleuth, but she does love antiques and history, and she loves colonial Williamsburg. She's got a new job at William and Mary, and oh goodness, she finds victims. She sees things or examines the history of things that have been stolen, and she solves crimes
Mm.
just as an amateur sleuth. And she has a head of the history department who's a good friend and mentor. They kind of are in conflict a lot of the time. She has a good friend who's on the detective force there in Williamsburg, and a couple other people. So I hope that I get at least five good mysteries out of it. I want to go to Williamsburg and do some more looking around to get things right. And I'm working on another story and a couple of children's books. So that's really what I want to say.
Okay. Okay. You're keeping busy. So where can listeners find you to follow you and learn more about your next projects?
If they go to Amazon.com, there's a way to follow me and what I'm currently working on, or whenever one of my new books comes on. I did have a web page, but I'm on Wix, but I'm taking it down, or I did take it down last week, and I'm going to redo it and put it back up with some more book covers and how you can get them. But I think I'm just selling through Amazon.com and Instagram, and the information would be there where it says follow. Follow
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, and people
That's
can also, find your page on the quillhawkpublishing.com website as well, but Amazon, Author Central, definitely a place to check you out. And I think you're on Facebook and Instagram as well, for Jackie Kraft. So there's,
probably true. I really haven't posted on Facebook, and I probably will. I haven't really posted much about either of these books, but I'm going to in the next 3 or 4 months. I'm hopeful that by April, there'll be a big disclosure from our government. Steven Spielberg has a movie coming out next summer called Disclosure that will really reveal quite a bit of facts. I think everybody will just be thrilled with that, and then maybe they'll want to find my book and see what else there is to know from an
yeah.
experiencer.
Yeah. Well, I'm a believer, and you and I also went to the Conscious Life Expo earlier this, year in 2025 in LA, and that was quite an interesting conference for me in terms of meeting Linda Moulton Howe and
Oh,
just,
yes.
the Skinwalker Ranch guys. I mean, there were so many people sharing their stories about encounters,
Yes.
and
She worked
UAP.
for the CBS affiliate in Denver for 35 years and examined the cattle mutilations. I've never seen a mutilation, but she has a podcast on Wednesday nights and interviews everybody. And the Skinwalker people, they are ready to start their new series, and it's absolute. I'm just glued to this. Have to watch some of their shows twice. They have so much information. So I think we're coming into a time when a lot will be revealed to us that's puzzled us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Jackie, for spending this hour with us. I really appreciate your time and sharing your stories of the Cherokee people and also your personal experience with encounters and your spiritual past lives and that kind of thing. Listeners, that was Jackie Kraft, and she's an author, a teacher, journalist, keeper of stories, both cosmic and ancestral. And
Thank you.
so from ET visitations to Cherokee medicine bundles, Jackie shows us that storytelling is not just entertainment, it's memory and courage and connection across time and space. If Jackie's words moved you today, please be sure to check out her books. Some of My Best Friends Are ETs and Under a Sunflower Moon. And thank you for joining us on Quixotic Heights. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep reaching for the heights. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Thank you.